The 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup has now finished, but the competition isn't yet over. What about the men's versus women's competition from a financial perspective? The dust has now settled, and we thought it'd be a good time to review the FIFA Women's World Cup against the FIFA Men's World Cup, talking about the finances specifically. There's been lots in the media about equal pay for the players and for the organisations that take part. But what's the truth behind the figures? Stay tuned as we find out. My name is Neil Wood and I'm a football finance professional. Here on Football Finance Professionals, we use our knowledge from inside the football industry as finance professionals to share with you and educate you about finance topics. So if you like the video, leave us a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, and maybe share it with your friends if you find it useful. Before we get started, we need to understand a little bit about FIFA, the organisation, and how it is funded and how it funds others. FIFA, or Fédération Internationale de Football Association, or the International Federation of Association Football, is a charity that governs football international. It does pretty much what it says on the tin. The organisation is based in Switzerland, and its financial results are reported over a 4-year cycle that aligns with the Men's World Cup. So the latest financials that have been reported by FIFA end in the year 2022, which aligned with the Qatar World Cup. According to the FIFA website, the organisation exists to govern football and develop it worldwide. And although FIFA's responsibilities are not limited to World Cup competitions, historically, the Men's World Cup has been their flagship event. The first FIFA Men's World Cup was in 1930, 26 years after FIFA was founded itself. And the competition is held on a 4-year cycle. There have been 22 FIFA Men's World Cups since the competition started. In comparison, the FIFA Women's World Cup was founded in 1991, and there have only been 9 4-year cycles since that point. When it comes to the makeup of the competition and number of participants, the Men's and Women's World Cup are equal, 32 teams in each. However, the Men's World Cup from 2026 will expand to 48 teams. An expansion is very much on the agenda when it comes to FIFA's strategy. Gianni Infantino has a plan to expand FIFA's responsibility when it comes to competitions, and the FIFA Club World Cup is one of the competitions that is looking to drive forwards. That particular competition is a World Cup, but for clubs rather than international countries. And it's a competition that in future will be looking to challenge UEFA's Champions League as an international club competition of the highest standard. Obviously, at present, the UEFA competition is restricted to European teams, although there is talk of expansion of that competition beyond the European borders already. And FIFA sees the club competition as an example of an opportunity to be able to expand. But at the same time, women's football is on the rise and presents a further opportunity to FIFA to be able to grow into another market. And to be fair to FIFA, although the words that have been chosen haven't necessarily been the best, it appears to support the women's game. But what do the financials say behind the narrative? Stick around and you'll find out. The international women's game and domestic competitions have grown rapidly over the past few years in a post-COVID environment. The Lionesses have seen unprecedented success both in European and World Cup competitions, outstripping the performance of their male counterparts. So as a result, the game in England is growing in popularity at an exponential rate. Having said that, the starting point was quite low. So in comparison to the men's game, there's a lot of catching up to do. And when it comes to catching up, the word investment is required, and that requires some form of financial backing. And a careful balance is going to need to be struck between investing in the game, making sure that it can grow, and not growing it too rapidly. Being able to ensure a sustainable level of growth is going to be vital. Will the game need to rely upon the male club counterparts, or can the game stand as its own independent body? We've already seen issues when it comes to the volume of games that are being played. The women have a little bit of catching up to do when it comes to that frequency of games, needing to recover, and with a number of issues with regards to injuries. And the domestic game is currently funded by the men's competition, and the male equivalents are being encouraged by their governing bodies to invest in women's football through FFP calculations, where the women's investment is relievable, i.e. it doesn't count towards their FFP calculation. And that brings us on to the money that FIFA generates. There have been many vocal campaigners when it comes to equal pay for women, particularly in the sport of football. But does the competition, being the FIFA Women's World Cup, bring in enough money to fund itself in order to be able to pay an equivalent amount to the men, to both the players and the federations that are involved? The stark reality is that it doesn't. As an independent competition, it would not be able to fund the same level of prize money that is available to the men's competition. So that leaves two options. If pay parity is the desired outcome, either the men's prize pot needs to reduce or the women's prize pot needs to increase to match that of the men's, but needs to be funded from another competition. See, revenues from FIFA primarily come from their competitions. And in order to be able to assess whether FIFA can afford to pay the women more, we need to look at their financial results. FIFA's finances are presented on a 4-year cycle. The latest results, as we discussed earlier, ended in 2022. And for 3 out of the 4 years, FIFA makes losses, with the 4th year being the year that the Men's World Cup is held, and historically, that has wiped clean all of the previous losses and created a surplus for the charity FIFA. Any surpluses would be reinvested back into the game, back into the charitable organisation. But would the organisation be able to fund an increase in the FIFA Women's World Cup? And is that the right thing to do? The FIFA financial statements are available on their website, and they're free to view, so why not take a look for yourself? If you look at the financial statements, you can see that revenue for the 4-year cycle ending 2022 hit $7.6 billion. The vast majority of that came in the Qatar World Cup year of 2022. Almost $5.8 billion came from 2022 itself. And that's broken down broadly into a similar pattern that you would see across any professional football club. FIFA itself generates revenue from 3 primary sources, although the website discloses 6. Broadcasting, marketing rights, licensing rights, hospitality and ticket sales, other revenue, and other income. Now, we don't need to get into the complexities of the accounting here, but these categories can broadly be aligned with football club revenue streams. Broadcasting, that's an obvious one, and the primary source for most Premier League football clubs at least. Marketing rights, or what's called sponsorship deals, or commercial revenue in the world of club football. Commercial revenue would also include any licensing rights for the club logo or any other intellectual property. In this case, it's FIFA's intellectual property that's being licensed. Revenue from hospitality and ticket sales is equated to matchday income. And then there are some minor or less significant other revenue streams. From FIFA's perspective, these would be things such as the FIFA Museum or the FIFA Quality Programme. And clubs are expanding more and more into different ways of being able to generate revenue, as I'm sure FIFA will be exploring as many ways as possible to generate as much revenue as possible. But broadly, in a football club, you would get broadcasting, commercial, and matchday revenue. Commercial being a catch-all for anything that doesn't fit into the other 2 categories. FIFA's financial statements from the revenue perspective disclose a slightly higher level of detail from that of a football club. When it comes to broadcasting rights, the largest revenue stream for the majority of the years that are under review. Almost $3 billion was generated by FIFA in the 2022 year alone. That's obviously come from the Qatar World Cup, or primarily from that competition. Simply, this is what broadcasters are willing to pay FIFA for the rights to distribute their games for that competition on their TV channels. Very similar to that of any other competition. By comparison, FIFA set a $300 million target for the Women's World Cup broadcasting rights in 2023. Now, the 2023 financial results for FIFA aren't yet available, and we'll have to wait for the next publication to be able to see the actual results. But rumour has it that broadcasting rights fell below that $300 million target, which is already 10% of what's been generated from the men's competition. FIFA's marketing rights, or what we'd call sponsorship or commercial revenue when it comes to club finances, is the second highest revenue stream for FIFA. In 2022, FIFA generated $1.4 billion from marketing rights. If you dig a little deeper into the FIFA financial statements, you'll see that $534 million of that $1.4 billion came from the World Cup competition in 2022. That's disclosed on the website if you click into the further detail on the financial statements. We can see here that the FIFA World Cup generated this figure. Indirectly linked to that, which makes up the majority of what the balance is made up of, is FIFA partners, which vastly increase in the year of a World Cup competition. So although not directly World Cup sponsors, they have an indirect impact on the overall pot of FIFA partners. When it comes to the women's equivalent, we're looking at a reported $308 million when it comes to partnership or sponsorship income for FIFA. Now that's not too dissimilar to that of the men's game if you just count the $534 million, but that disregards the spike in FIFA partners being a general organisation in the year of a men's World Cup, where they will get more exposure indirectly. So although the women are generating approximately 2/3 of what's directly linked, there is an underlying trend whereby FIFA are generating more money in a men's World Cup year from partnership deals that aren't specifically World Cup partners. It's worth noting that reported $308 million, which doesn't come from FIFA itself but other sources, has grown significantly since 2019 when it was $17 million. So we can already see a massive leap in the finances when it comes to the Women's World Cup. The third largest revenue stream for FIFA, especially in a World Cup year, is ticketing and hospitality, effectively match day income. And that figure from the Qatar World Cup came to $292 million. And this is simply what corporates and individuals are paying to watch the games in the stadia. A significant revenue stream for FIFA when it comes to the Men's World Cup, which is likely to be substantially less when it comes to the Women's World Cup. In 2019, the figure for hospitality and ticket sales from other events which were not the FIFA Men's World Cup came to almost $8 million. So there's going to be a significant difference between that figure and the $929 million that's been generated from the Qatar World Cup. And given the pricing structure that we can see on the FIFA website for the Women's World Cup competition in 2023, the amount generated is still going to be a small fraction of that of the men's competition. So we can see that the money flowing into FIFA from the Women's World Cup is substantially less than that of the men's competition. But what about the expenses? Obviously, each competition is going to be extremely expensive in a variety of ways, just like it is to host any competition when it comes to domestic football, but on a greater scale. The 2022 Qatar World Cup has reportedly cost FIFA $1.8 billion in itself. The 2019 France Women's World Cup are reported $156 million. And within those quoted figures is the prize money that's allocated to the winners, runners-up, and other participants within the competition, both from a federation perspective and for players. In addition to that, there's also compensation paid to the players' clubs for effectively loaning the player that's owned by the club to their national team so that they can participate in the FIFA World Cup or Women's World Cup. And the element of the finances that's caused the most debate is the prize pot that's available for distribution to both the teams and the players, and trying to make that as equal as possible. So how do they compare? Well, the prize pot for the women's competition in 2023 was $152 million, of which $110 million was performance-based. That figure equates to $30 million in 2019. So it's been almost quadrupled in a 4-year period. That's a substantial rise in anybody's eyes. But is it still comparable to that of the men? Well, the answer is simply no. The men's prize pot stood at $440 million. And going back to the women's competition, the winners, Spain, would receive $4.2 million as an organisation, and England as runners-up would have received $3 million. Each of the winners, from a player's perspective, on the Spanish team would have received $270,000 each, and England players would have received $195,000. That figure seems to be relatively freely available on a variety of sources which are reputable, but the male equivalent isn't available, or at least it's not easy to find. In Qatar 2022, the $440 million prize pot was divided up amongst all of the participants, with a large chunk being performance-based, and $42 million was paid to Argentina, which is roughly 10 times that of the female counterparts, Spain, in the 23 World Cup. France, being the runners-up in the 22 World Cup competition, received $30 million, exactly 10 times that of England in the women's competition. And it's been reported by various sources that the Argentinian prize pot in particular would be equally divided amongst 32 players, being approximately $1.3 million each. in comparison to the 270,000 that the women's Spanish players would receive on an individual basis. So once again, it looks like there's a substantial gap of almost $1 million, if we assume that those figures are correct. But the overall problem is that there is a funding gap between the prize pots of the men's and women's competition of approximately $300 million. And how could that gap have been closed? Well, there was a 4-year cycle surplus of $1.2 billion in the year ended 2022. It's quite clear from the FIFA website that $2.4 billion was made as a surplus in the year 2022, which was slightly offset by deficits in the previous 3 years, which brought the surplus down by over $1 billion. But there was still money left in the pot. That money could have been used to close the gap of roughly $300 million between the prize pot of the men's and women's competitions. But should that have been used for that purpose? And this comes back to a larger debate. Should the women's game stand on its own 2 feet as a separate competition, or should they be looking to use funds from their male counterparts to close the gap, and therefore creating a reliance on the men's competition? The domestic game is already being encouraged to do so, with the men's clubs investing in the women's clubs, and by doing so, it creates a reliance on effectively a shareholder, like we already see in men's club football. And when we get that reliance on one party, it's not necessarily healthy for that club or that industry. A lot of clubs are now dependent on rich benefactors. And if we take the club as being the women's competition or women's game, does the women's game want to become reliant on a funder that is the men's competition? Or should the women's game look to stand on their own 2 feet and potentially go elsewhere to generate their own funding? That could come from investment banks or different investors. It could come in the form of debt. And this is something that's already been explored, particularly by the FA. And what the game needs to do is to be able to grow in a sustainable manner that isn't necessarily reliant on one body or one person or one organisation. And you could argue that it isn't the right thing to do to generate funds to create pay parity from the men's game. But you could also create the counter argument to be exactly the opposite. So what's your thought on this particular topic? It's not an easy one to be able to debate, but please leave your comments below. If we go down a route of the women's game being more reliant on the men's game for funding, then does it make sense that the 2 biggest competitions, being the World Cup female and male competitions, are held in 2 different locations in 2 different years? Or would it make sense to align them both from a location and a timing perspective? Would that even be practical? Because if we look at other competitions, the Olympic Games, the Commonwealth Games, major sporting events such as Wimbledon or other tennis events, the men's and women's games are played side by side. The most recent Commonwealth Games integrated able and para athletes almost seamlessly, and there would have been an argument that everyone would have benefited as a result, including the participants and the fans. And if the fans and people watching are benefiting, then that's likely to attract better broadcast deals. It could lead to higher prices because there'll be higher demand. So ticket sales could go up, or you could charge more for that. Sponsors may want to be more heavily involved and would be willing to overpay in comparison to the 2 separate competitions. So is that something that FIFA should explore? What are your thoughts on that in particular? Why is football different to a lot of other sports? Is it the practicality of being able to play football matches back to back on a football pitch? Are there other logistical factors that we need to consider? Or could it be that countries' infrastructures are now able to cope with men's and women's World Cup competitions or even European championships? And would there be a benefit financially for everyone, not just the women, by combining these competitions? Or is it that there is a counter narrative to that and that it's better to be separate? If they're in different years, it means that fans have different competitions to watch. A football fan can watch the Men's World Cup in 2022 and the Women's World Cup in 2023, and then have European Championships, and then we have this continuous cycle of international competitions that we can watch on an annual basis, alternating between men and women. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, so please leave them in the comments below. But what's clear to us at the moment is there is no parity when it comes to the women's game in comparison to the men's. The women's game has come on leaps and bounds, both financially and in popularity, and we're certain that the popularity and the financials will continue to grow in a positive manner. My name is Neil Wood, and I'm a football finance professional. If you enjoyed the video, please leave us a like, and if you're interested in more football finance topics, please subscribe, share with your friends, and leave us a comment below. Thanks for watching.